Picture this moment. William stands completely alone in a dusty, forgotten room inside Kensington Palace. His hands brush against something hidden, something that's been waiting in the shadows for decades. An envelope emerges from the darkness, and scrawled across the front in handwriting he'd recognize anywhere are 6 words that stop his heart cold. "Open if I die, Diana." What lies inside these pages has been kept from him his entire life, and once he reads it, nothing about the royal family will ever be the same again. Now, before we dive deeper into this story, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what unfolds next is something you absolutely cannot miss. The temperature in that room feels glacial, yet William senses heat flooding through his chest. There's a trembling in his fingers as he carefully extracts a weathered wooden box from its hiding place behind a false panel. This used to be his mother's private study, her sanctuary within the palace walls. Finding something like this isn't an everyday occurrence. Actually, it's the kind of discovery that changes everything, and he knows it deep in his bones even before he fully understands what he's holding. Inside this box, underneath a collection of faded photographs and a broken wristwatch, sits the envelope. It's cream-colored, pristine, untouched by the years that have passed. The handwriting stops him completely. He stares at those words, wondering if this is reality or some kind of waking dream. "Open if I die." She wrote this with purpose, with knowledge of something terrible approaching. His mind races backward through time, sifting through childhood memories. Diana's brilliant smile, her whispered warnings about the palace machinery, about the press that hunted her, about the hidden figures pulling strings behind elegant curtains, everything suddenly clicks into place in a way it never has before. Should he open it now? Should he be alone for this? What about Harry? What about Kate? These questions hammer at him. What if this letter destroys everything he thought he understood? What if it fundamentally changes how he sees everyone around him, including the man who raised him? But then something sharper cuts through the uncertainty. If his mother went to such lengths to hide this message, she did it for a reason. If this envelope has been waiting in silence all these years, maybe it's been waiting specifically for this moment. Right now, when the weight of the crown feels heavier than ever, when truth has become something rare and precious and almost impossible to find, he breaks the seal carefully, reverently. His heart pounds so hard he can hear it in his ears. Then he sees the opening line, and the world tilts sideways. "If you're reading this, they succeeded." The air catches in his throat. This isn't a goodbye letter. This isn't closure or comfort or a mother's final words of love. This is a warning shot fired from beyond the grave, timed like a bomb that's been counting down for decades. This is about consequences, and somewhere someone made absolutely certain this stayed buried until this exact moment. But as William's eyes travel further down the page, what he discovers doesn't just shock him. It implicates people he sees every single day. People who smile at him across dinner tables and shake his hand at official functions. Diana always spoke about fearing for her life. Everyone dismissed it as paranoia, as the rambling of a troubled woman under too much pressure. But what if she wasn't paranoid? What if she was prophetic? This letter was written just weeks before her death. In it, she names names. She describes shadows that followed her. She lays out a plan so calculated, so methodical, that shivers run down William's spine as he reads. The deeper he goes, the harder it becomes to draw breath. Diana's words don't read like the soft memories of someone defeated. They're the carefully constructed warnings of a woman who knew the walls were closing in around her. She writes about a growing chill inside the palace, about sensing she was no longer being watched for her protection but monitored for containment. She describes walking into rooms where conversations would stop mid-sentence, phone calls that would abruptly disconnect, official letters arriving that contained information only discussed in supposedly private conversations. She calls it the machine, and she underlines those words 3 times. William stops reading, his hands clench into fists, because this isn't just ancient history anymore. This isn't just his mother's fear. This is his reality now. Diana wrote about being followed after charity events by vehicles with windows so dark you couldn't see inside. She wrote about men who would appear at the edges of red carpets, never making eye contact but always present, always watching. She describes receiving elaborate flower arrangements with no card attached, wrapped in ribbon that could only have come from the palace. The first time it happened, she thought someone made a mistake. The third time she received one, she understood it was a warning. Then comes the moment that shifts everything into sharp, terrifying focus. Diana describes a formal dinner, a glittering evening filled with senior royals and influential figures. During this event, one particular comment shattered any remaining illusions she had about her safety. A high-ranking figure leaned toward her, glass in hand, voice smooth with practiced power, and said something that made her blood run cold. "You're a problem we need to solve." She wrote that nobody in the room reacted, not even a flicker of surprise. It was as if everyone present had already come to this conclusion long before. She turns her attention to Charles, but not with rage or hysteria. Her observations are cold, clinical, devastating in their clarity. She suggests he wanted a fresh start, a second chapter to his story. But as long as she remained in the picture, public sympathy would always flow toward her. Press attention would follow him like a shadow. Constitutional complications would multiply. He wanted peace, she writes, and I became the noise he couldn't silence. She never explicitly states that he was involved in what might come next. She doesn't need to spell it out. Toward the end of the letter, her tone shifts completely. It becomes deeply maternal, written not for the world but specifically for William. She tells him to be strong yet cautious, never mistake politeness for loyalty, beware of flattery, especially from those who smile the brightest. Then one line appears, written with such intensity it practically jumps off the page. Never trust the smiling ones. It's vague, it's cryptic. But William knows exactly who she means. He can see their faces clearly in his mind, hear their voices. People still walking these palace corridors today. People he's dined with, laughed with, trusted completely. Finally, she closes with a sentence that feels less like a farewell and more like a final verdict. If I vanish, don't believe the cameras. The silence that follows those words is absolutely deafening. William lowers the letters slowly. Every word is burned into his consciousness now. Every memory of his mother has been reframed in an instant. Every comforting lie he's been told suddenly feels brittle and threatening. But he knows this can't stay with him alone. So he makes the one call that might change everything or destroy what little remains. When William sends a single photograph of the envelope to Harry, the response comes instantly, a missed call. Then another. Then a text message that simply says, "Tell me you haven't opened it without me." The two brothers haven't spoken in months. Their relationship has been fractured, distant, cold. But this discovery could force a reunion, or it could trigger a final collision. William doesn't speak when he answers Harry's next call. His voice is uneven, strained, but absolutely determined. He confirms it's real. Diana's handwriting. A sealed message hidden away for decades. Harry falls completely silent on the other end of the line. The weight of their mother's words suddenly collapses into the space between them, bridging years of distance in a single moment. Without hesitation, Harry makes a decision that stuns even his closest advisors. He books a red-eye flight to London. No security detail, no press notification, no explanation to a new. At the gates of Kensington Palace, confusion erupts. Harry hasn't coordinated his arrival with anyone. The guards don't know whether protocol allows them to let him in or requires them to turn him away. For the first time in years, the Duke of Sussex arrives not to fanfare but to a wall of procedure and uncertainty. It takes a single phone call from William to clear the path forward. When those gates finally open, Harry walks through them not as a prince returning home, but as a son chasing ghosts he thought were long buried. Inside the palace, tension fills every corner of the room. There are no greetings, no embraces. Just years of accumulated distance hanging in the air like storm clouds ready to break. William hands Harry the letter without saying a word, then steps back to give his brother space. Together they read it in silence. Though they don't exchange words for long minutes, the silence communicates everything. Page by page, line by line, their mother's pain becomes their shared burden, and what once divided them now binds them together again in absolute horror. Flashbacks flood through their minds simultaneously. Late-night phone calls from Diana warning them not to trust certain people. Her sudden tears in quiet moments when she thought no one was watching. The way she always double-checked that doors were locked. These weren't the overreactions of someone unstable. They were the final desperate acts of someone trying to survive in a system designed to contain her. And nobody listened. Then Harry speaks. Not loudly, not with theatrical anger, but with a voice cracked by grief and rage mixed together. They lied to us, all of them. William nods slowly. S red-rimmed, fists clenched tight. This wasn't just a letter. This was an indictment, a reckoning, a truth bomb buried so deeply that even they had forgotten to keep searching for it. But now that it's surfaced, it demands action. Real, tangible, irreversible action. The brothers don't need to discuss what comes next. They both already know the path forward is dangerous, controversial, and potentially catastrophic. But for the first time in years, they're walking it together. What the brothers don't realize is that someone else has already been alerted about this discovery. The same person Diana specifically warned them about. Diana didn't just write about Charles in that letter. She underlined Camilla's name 3 times. In a document filled with caution, betrayal, and premonition, this was the only name given that level of emphasis. What did Diana know about Camilla's role in her downfall? And why is the Queen consort suddenly panicking behind those palace walls? William and Harry had barely finished processing the full weight of their mother's message when they turned to another page and saw Camilla's name there, isolated, underlined with firm, deliberate strokes. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. The ink, though faded by years, still carries a fury that time hasn't diminished. This wasn't a casual mention. This was a warning screaming from the page, and the words that followed shattered any illusion of innocence surrounding this woman. Diana wrote that Camilla was always more than just a mistress. She wasn't simply the woman Charles loved. She was the woman who knew too much, moved too quietly through the palace corridors, and wanted far too much. According to He letter, Diana had long suspected that Camilla's influence extended well beyond romance and affair. She wrote about whispered phone conversations intercepted late at night, about discussions that would abruptly stop whenever she entered a room, about a quiet campaign to isolate her completely. And all trails, Diana claimed, led directly back to Camilla. But there's one specific memory Diana recounts that hits William like a physical blow. A lunch at Clarence's house, just the 2 of them sitting across from each other. Polite on the surface, civil in appearance, but beneath that veneer Diana claims there was pure venom. She wrote that Camilla, smiling sweetly, leaned in with a glass of wine in hand and whispered something chilling. "One way or another you'll be out of the picture." Diana didn't confront her in that moment. But she never forgot those words. She describes another incident, less direct but equally disturbing, a private gathering of aristocrats and longtime palace allies. The conversation turned to succession planning, image management, and the burden of royal scandal on the institution. Diana claims she wasn't invited to contribute, only to listen and absorb. And what she heard left her genuinely shaken. References to clean starts, to rebranding the monarchy for a modern era, to removing chaos from the equation. Nobody said her name outright. They didn't need to. She felt the net closing in around her, and in her own words, she stopped trusting anything that wore a crown or smiled while saying nothing of substance. In the days following the letter's discovery, palace insiders report strange behavior inside Clarence's house. Camilla has canceled multiple meetings, reportedly due to sudden fatigue and stress. Staff members whisper about her staring blankly at her phone during briefings, refusing to eat, actively avoiding cameras. One staffer, speaking on condition of anonymity, reveals that the queen consort was visibly shaking after receiving an undisclosed phone call from within the palace. Whatever was said during that conversation clearly rattled her to her core. Behind closed doors, her communications team moves into emergency mode. A quiet memo circulates through her private office. The language is crisp, cold, calculated. Nothing is confirmed. Deny everything. They know something massive is building, but they don't yet realize how much has already slipped beyond their control. For the first time since Diana's death, Camilla isn't steering the narrative, she's reacting to it, scrambling to contain it. And while the public still hasn't seen the full contents of this letter, pressure is building like steam in a sealed container. The world is beginning to connect dots that powerful people worked very hard to keep separate, and Camilla is already running out of air. But Camilla isn't the only one deeply worried right now, because King Charles is about to read his ex-wife's final words, and they're aimed directly at him like arrows. No king should ever be confronted with a message from the dead. Yet here Charles stands, the letter trembling in his hands, reading Diana's final accusation. "You used me, erased me, and now I haunt your crown." For the first time in decades, he's forced to answer to the woman he couldn't silence in life. The air in the room feels stiff, uncomfortably cold. William sits across from his father, eyes R&D, jaw clenched tight. There's no embrace, no warmth, no pretense of comfort. Only the envelope between them, opened, flattened, now impossible to ignore or dismiss. William doesn't offer it with kindness or gentle suggestion. He demands that Charles read it aloud, every single word. Not for tradition's sake, not for protocol, but for justice. The kind Diana never received while she was alive. Charles hesitates, not out of defiance, but out of genuine fear. He picks up the letter with fingers that tremble noticeably, already sensing what horrors it contains. As his eyes scan the opening lines, the change in his expression is immediate and devastating. The royal mask he's worn for decades slips completely. Guilt creeps across his features like shadows at sunset. Diana's words, though penned in private agony years ago, now roar like thunder in the heavy silence. Her voice, long buried beneath duty and deliberate distraction, has returned, and it echoes through every sentence with devastating clarity. When he reaches the line that reads, "If something happens to me, look in your mirror," Charles physically flinches. His lips falter mid-word, his hands shake more violently. The room feels smaller, suffocating, closing in around him. William watches without speaking. He wants his father to feel every ounce of this. Not just as a king, not just as a figurehead, but as the man who once vowed before the world to love Diana, and then let that promise rot behind these palace walls. Charles finishes reading the letter, but he says nothing meaningful. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't explain or justify. Instead, he mutters something that sounds more like dismissal than reflection. The past is gone. It's not enough. Not for William, not for the truth, and certainly not for Diana's memory. That cold deflection hits like betrayal happening all over again. William's voice rises, not with volume but with a fury that only comes from decades of suppressed pain finally breaking free. He accuses Charles not just of abandoning Diana, but of actively hiding what she feared, of protecting a system that watched her fall apart and did absolutely nothing to help. Charles, cornered and defensive, refuses to mention Camilla by name. He dodges. He insists things were more complicated than they appear. But William doesn't want diplomacy or careful language anymore. He wants accountability. Later that night, palace staff scramble in panic. Something's wrong. Charles has locked himself away in his private chambers. One senior staff member leaks information to a journalist claiming the king has suffered a serious emotional breakdown. Rumors swirl of shouting behind closed doors, of documents being torn apart, of a man completely unraveling under the weight of everything he thought was permanently buried. But the monarchy doesn't confirm or deny anything. It never does. Still, the cracks are showing clearly now, and Charles knows deep in his soul that this isn't over. The letter didn't just revive the past, it's setting the future on fire. But outside those palace walls, someone else is watching carefully and waiting to strike with the envelope. Explosive contents. The letter was only the beginning of this nightmare. Hidden within the envelope was a smaller fold of paper, its contents never meant for royal eyes. Diana had included copies of private conversations, a coded list of names, and one photograph that had never surfaced publicly. Someone wanted this buried forever, but now it's a loaded weapon. As William unfolded the extra slip tucked behind the main letter, he immediately sensed its danger. It wasn't emotional like the letter itself, it was strategic, cold, calculated. It had the feeling of evidence, not farewell. On it was a handwritten list containing just first names, some with circles drawn around them, others marked with slashes. 2 names had small X marks next to them. To anyone else looking at this, it would appear meaningless, random, but William knows better. This isn't a diary entry, this is a message designed to outlive her, encrypted in a way only Diana could have crafted. Simple enough to look innocent, devastating to the right reader. Then comes the photograph. Folded into thirds, slightly grainy, torn at one edge. Diana stands with a man whose identity, while deliberately blurred, is unmistakable to those who matter. The background suggests a private location, somewhere discreet and off the record. The timing remains uncertain. The implications aren't. This was a conversation that should never have happened, and someone clearly tried very hard to ensure it never saw daylight. Beneath the image, in Diana's distinctive handwriting, are 2 chilling words: Project Penumbra. William stares at them, confused and disturbed. It sounds like a code name, something institutional, governmental, possibly even military in nature. And that's when the next domino falls. An anonymous message reaches William through a secure line delivered by a former contact at MI5. No greeting, no formality, just one stark line. You're being what? Ched. This goes beyond the palace. At first, William doesn't want to believe it. Surely that's paranoia. But then come the subtle confirmations he can't ignore. Security patterns around Kensington change without explanation. Cars he doesn't recognize park nearby for suspiciously long periods. An intercepted text message appears on his phone that was never meant for him. The surveillance isn't paranoia. It's absolutely real. When William tells Harry about this development, the younger prince doesn't flinch. He only replies with brutal clarity. You've started something you can't undo. It wasn't said with fear, it was stated as simple fact. Because now the envelope has become something far more dangerous than royal scandal. It's become a genuine threat to the entire institution, and someone with real power wants it back under lock and key immediately. William takes action. He secures the contents in a private off-grid location far from palace reach. But he isn't fast enough. Within hours, whispers begin leaking strategically to the press. Not the full story yet, just calculated fragments. Mentions of a secret dossier, a buried photograph, a scandal tied to Diana that could reignite old wars inside the royal family. It's enough to spark absolute chaos. And someone inside the palace is deliberately feeding these flames. And when the public catches wind of these leaks, the entire monarchy plunges into the kind of crisis not seen since Edward abdicated the throne decades ago. Within hours, hashtags Diana Letter and Open If I Die trend worldwide across every social media platform. News anchors break down, crying on air. TikTok theorists explode with speculation and analysis. And royal loyalists, those who've defended the institution their entire lives, begin to turn on their queen consort. The monarchy, already fragile in modern times, is now burning under a spotlight of suspicion and betrayal, with William and Harry standing directly at the center of this storm. The leaks weren't subtle or accidental. They were surgical, precise, devastating. Specific phrases from the letter appeared in headlines first, then in full television broadcasts. If I vanish, don't believe the cameras. One way or another, you'll be out of the picture. The press latched onto every line with ravenous intensity. Within a single news cycle, what was a quiet, contained crisis behind palace walls became a global inferno. What was once private grief transformed into public outrage that couldn't be contained. And the fire showed no signs of stopping. Thousands demanded answers in the streets. Parliamentarians called for independent inquiries into Diana's death. Online petitions soared past 1 million signatures overnight. The questions being asked were brutal, direct, impossible to ignore any longer. Who knew about this letter? Why was it hidden for so long? And most damning of all, was Diana right about everything? Public opinion polls dropped like dead weight. King Charles's approval rating fell to a historic low, lower even than during the darkest days of his affair with Camilla becoming public knowledge. Trust in the monarchy fractured at its core. Commentators who once shielded the institution now dissected it piece by piece on national television, emboldened by floodgates of scandal now blown wide open. The idea that Diana had been silenced by more than just tragic accident was no longer a fringe conspiracy theory. It was mainstream discourse happening in living rooms across the world. Camilla vanished from public view entirely. Official statements cited stress-related illness, but palace insiders confirmed she was not emotionally equipped to face this storm. Events were canceled without explanation. Interviews were pulled at the last minute. Staff reported her walking the palace halls in complete silence, refusing even to meet Charles's eyes. The press branded it a silent collapse, and in the streets outside, silence was definitely not an option. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds returned in force, but not in celebration this time. Protesters gathered with candles, handmade signs, and tears streaming down their faces. Photographs of Diana framed in black tape were held high above the crowd. Some signs read, "She tried to warn us." Others, more damning, declared, "No more lies." This wasn't just grief manifesting, this was justice being demanded. A reckoning decades in the making, now screaming at palace gates. Newspapers around the entire world printed front pages with singular, unified messaging. Diana tried to warn us. Morning television shows turned solemn and serious. Former palace staff began whispering to the press, breaking years of silence. A climate of fear was finally breaking apart, and beneath all this chaos, a truth emerged that couldn't be suppressed anymore. This wasn't just a scandal, this was a legacy war, and Diana, though long gone from this world, had become the loudest voice in every room. But just when the world thinks the envelope has revealed everything it possibly could, it turns out Diana left behind one more message. Hidden in plain sight. Nobody expected this discovery, not even William. A second letter surfaces, this one hidden in the velvet lining of an heirloom tiara Diana wore just days before her death. It emerges through a royal jeweler who's kept this secret for years. And its message isn't for her sons this time. It was written for her daughter-in-law. For Kate, it began with a package arriving, small, unmarked, left anonymously at Kensington with a sealed envelope and a trembling note from a renowned jeweler who once worked on the royal collection. He claimed the letter was discovered during a routine restoration, a standard inspection of Diana's sapphire tiara commissioned for archival purposes. Inside the velvet lining, tucked carefully behind a stitched panel, was folded parchment with a single line written on the front. "For the woman who takes my place." Kate held it with both reverence and dread building in her chest. The handwriting was unmistakable. Elegant, slanted, achingly familiar. Diana's tone in this letter was different from the first. Not urgent or fearful, but hauntingly measured, almost prophetic. The letter was short, but it pierced like a blade straight through Kate's heart. Diana didn't speak about the past in these pages. She spoke about the future, Kate's future specifically. Diana warned of betrayal coming not from outside the palace walls, but from within its very heart. She described a curse passed through generations, not a supernatural spell, but a pattern, a silence. Women loved then used, admired then erased, cycle after cycle repeating itself. She wrote that the crown came with a price everyone knew about, but that the real debt was always call. Seated in whispers nobody could hear clearly. And then came the line that shook Kate to her absolute core. One day a future queen will be asked to choose between love and silence. When that day comes, do not choose silence. Kate froze completely. The words hit too close to her own experience, the pressure she feels constantly, the expectations that never end, the eyes watching every move, every misstep, every word that leaves her mouth. She had long felt the tension beneath her title, the weight nobody outside could fully understand. But now it had a voice, Diana's voice, and with it, a torch being silently passed from one woman to another across time itself. The letter ended with a single sentence, soft but absolutely chilling. "You will know when the time comes." No explanation, no specific names, just a future moment waiting like a shadow, inevitable and approaching. Kate didn't say anything immediately. She simply handed the letter to William without speaking, and he read it in complete silence. His expression remained unreadable for a long time. Neither of them spoke afterward. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was loaded with meaning, with decisions that would have to be made, with fate bearing down on them both. Kate now held more than a legacy in her hands. She held a responsibility Diana had never been allowed to fulfill. A chance to break the cycle completely or fall victim to it like those who came before. And for William, this revelation brought everything into sharper, more painful focus. The lies, the system, the unbearable weight of their crown. And as Kate clutches this letter in silence, trying to process what it means, William speaks 4 words to hat no royal has ever dared say aloud. "The crown ends with me." William's voice echoes across stone walls and centuries of unbroken tradition. The monarchy once silenced his mother completely. Now he might silence the monarchy itself. The final decision, whether to expose everything or protect the institution at all costs, falls on the shoulders of Diana's firstborn son. And this time he absolutely won't be silent. The weight of both letters has followed William constantly for days. Each word reverberates like a war drum behind his every step, his every decision. He knows that releasing the full contents would set the entire world ablaze. Names would fall from power. Reputations built over decades would collapse overnight. The very foundation of the monarchy could crack irreparably under the pressure of truth finally being told. But there's something stronger than fear pressing on his conscience right now. His mother's voice. The woman they tried so desperately to erase left behind a final rebellion. And he's the only one left who can make absolutely certain the world hears it clearly. Kate begs for caution, her voice filled not with fear for herself but for their children. She sees what this exposure might mean for George, for Charlotte, for Louis. A future stripped of stability, thrust into global chaos they never asked for. She pleads not to silence Diana's truth, but to shield what remains of their world from complete destruction. William listens carefully, but his silence is no longer hesitation. It's calculation, its determination solidifying into action. Harry, by stark contrast, doesn't flinch at all. He stands across from his brother and says what nobody else dares. The truth is the only justice she'll ever get. There's no palace left worth protecting in his eyes anymore. Only their mother's memory matters. And her voice, buried for decades under lies and protocol, is roaring now through every corridor of Buckingham. William walks alone through the palace that raised him and buried her, the same walls that taught him silence from childhood, the same halls where Diana once cried completely alone, and in his hand, clutched tightly, is her letter. Folded but absolutely not forgotten. The world watches as he steps onto a stage for a rare, completely unexpected public address. Royal staff remain frozen in shock. Cameras flash everywhere, but William speaks with no crown on his head, no pretense in his voice. Only pure resolve. "My mother left truths behind. I have read them carefully, and now I act." He doesn't elaborate further. He doesn't need to spell anything out. Within minutes, global headlines explode across every platform. Is he abdicating? Is he dismantling the monarchy entirely? Will he expose the entire institution to the world? The silence after his words somehow feels louder than any confirmation could be. And as Britain holds its collective breath, waiting for what comes next, one phrase echoes louder than anything else. "The crown ends with me." The screen may fade to black, but one question remains hanging in the air, unanswered and urgent. What would Diana want him to do next? So there you have it. A story about truth, legacy, and the courage it takes to break cycles that have lasted for generations. If this moved you, if it made you think, If it made you feel something real, do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what happens next. Because this story isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. And I'll see you in the next one.